Why does a 30-year-old truck now cost more than the one that replaced it? 12,000 cubic centimeters of cast iron, 6 cylinders, 0 computers. It is the engine the EPA spent 3 decades trying to finish off and never quite managed. Mechanics across America keep them out of sight for a reason, and that reason isn't sentimental. This is the story of the Mack that outlived its own regulators. Inside a rural diesel shop, the ledger tells a story that auction platforms never quite capture. On one side of the bay, a rebuilt Mack E7 short block sits on a pallet, tagged and quietly watched. The price scrawled in grease pencil, $12,000 firm, would have sounded absurd when these engines were new. Now, it is a starting point. In the last 4 years, auction sites have recorded E7 engines trading hands anywhere from $8,000 to $22,000, sometimes more if the block is clean and the pump is original. Mechanics know this price band by heart, but no one talks about it openly. The shop owner, a second-generation diesel man, keeps his own rule. If a Mack made before 2004 comes up at auction, you buy it. You do not ask questions and you do not post about it online. On the wall behind him, a hand-lettered sign reads, "No laptops, no excuses." It is half joke, half warning. Every mechanic here knows that the value of these engines is not nostalgia. It is the certainty that, when the new trucks go down, there is still something in the back room that can be fixed with a wrench and a feeler gauge. Forum stories echo through the shop like folklore. 1,000,000 miles on the clock is not a boast, but a baseline. One mechanic recalls a cabover that ran the same E7 block through 2 presidential administrations, only coming in for an overhaul when the frame itself rusted out. The engine, he says, went right back onto a fresh chassis. No one calls it hoarding. Around here, it is just prudent. The old-timers say you do not let a good engine leave the county. The unwritten rule is as much about survival as pride. In a market where a 30-year-old Mack commands a higher price than its replacement, the puzzle is not why these engines are hidden. The puzzle is why, in an era of sensors and shutdown codes, they are the only thing worth hiding. 12 liters of displacement, 6 inline cylinders, cast iron, and weighing in at just over 2,200 pounds dry. The Mack E7 entered production in 1989, stamped into the official record by factory brochures and dealer sheets that still circulate among mechanics like relics. Over a 20-year span from 1989 to 2009, the E7 was built in 16 distinct variants, each tailored to a different kind of work, such as construction, long haul, refuse, and logging. Power ratings ranged from 250 to 454 horsepower, with torque topping out at 1,660 pound-feet. Every early E7 shipped with a mechanical Bosch P-type injection pump, cam-driven and governed by centrifugal weights. No electronic control unit, no sensors, no digital handshake required. Timing was set by hand, with a wrench and a dial indicator, following procedures laid out in the service manual. The block itself carried replaceable wet liners, a design that allowed for in-frame rebuilds without machining. Cylinder heads were revised only twice in 2 decades, and even then, the basic casting and bolt patterns remained unchanged. The official parts catalogs list 16 model designations, each mapped to a specific turbocharger or emissions package, but the core mechanical architecture never deviated from the original brief. From launch, Mack promised an engine that could run 1,000,000 miles before overhaul. Internal warranty data and fleet logs show that most E7s made it past 1,000,000, with a significant number reaching 1.4 or 1.5 million before a major teardown. Mechanics still cite these numbers with a kind of grudging respect, less as myth, more as expectation. But the E7's reputation is not just a function of its hardware. On October 22, 1998, the United States Department of Justice and the Environmental Protection Agency levied an $83.4 million civil penalty against Mack and several competitors, citing defeat device violations that allowed engines to pass laboratory tests while emitting higher levels of NOx on the highway. The decree set a new compliance clock and forced a redesign of everything that had made the E7 a mechanic's engine. The penalty, recorded in Federal Registers and Securities and Exchange Commission filings, stands as the single largest civil environmental fine in the company's history. These are the facts that remain unarguable. 1989 debut, 2 decades of production, 12 liters, 16 variants, mechanical injection, and a penalty that changed the definition of what a truck could be. The next question is not what the E7 was, but how it was built, and why that mattered when the rules changed. A cast iron block, nearly half an inch thick at its thinnest points, forms the backbone of the E7. Each block leaves the foundry with its serial and casting numbers stamped deep into the rear face, a signature that outlasts paint and decals. The design is monoblock, one solid casting, no seams to shift under heat, no composite inserts to fail. But the real secret is inside. 6 wet liners, each a replaceable steel cylinder, drop into the block and seal at the base with a pair of rubber O-rings. When wear finally sets in after 1 million miles, a mechanic can pull the liners with a slide hammer, hone the bores, and press in new sleeves. No need for a machine shop, no need to split the block. The parts catalog lists the liner kit by number, and every shop that works on these engines keeps at least one set on the shelf. At the heart of the fuel system sits the Bosch P-type inline pump, driven directly off the camshaft. 6 plungers, each matched to a cylinder, ride a common cam, delivering fuel in perfectly timed pulses. There is no computer, no electronic map, just a mechanical governor, a stack of centrifugal weights, and a set of springs that decide, by physics alone, how much fuel the engine gets at any given revolutions per minute. Adjusting timing means loosening 2 bolts, rotating the pump a few degrees, and locking it back down. The service manual prescribes the dial indicator method, a ritual that has changed little since the 1950s. This architecture is more than just a nod to tradition. It means the E7 can be rebuilt in-frame, with the cab tilted and the block still bolted to the rails. Liners out, pistons out, new bearings dropped in, and the engine is ready for another 500,000 miles. For the mechanic, this is the difference between a truck that dies in a dealer bay and one that can be brought back to life with the right catalog and a weekend's work. The block, the liners, and the pump. These are the reasons the E7 is not just serviceable, but survivable. In the world of the Mack E7, diagnosis is a hands-on ritual. Senior mechanics reach for the same tools their mentors used: a stethoscope, a torque wrench, a battered service manual marked with oil-stained fingerprints. There are no scan tools, no laptops, no digital codes blinking out a verdict. Instead, the process begins with a valve trace, stethoscope pressed to each cover, listening for the crisp pop that tells of healthy cam timing. The rhythm is as familiar as a heartbeat, and any irregularity is picked up by EAR, not algorithm. Next comes the injector tap. With the engine idling, a mechanic taps each injector body with a hammer handle. A solid thump means the cylinder is firing, a dull note means it is time to pull the injector and clean the tip. The service manual spells out the sequence, but in practice it is muscle memory, a pattern repeated in countless shops from Maine to Montana. Timing adjustment is a matter of feel. The Bosch pump is rotated a few degrees by hand, then locked down with a torque wrench. The dial indicator measures plunger lift at a precise crank angle, but the final check is always done by ear, listening for the change in idle note. Operating the E7 within its torque band is not just a technical detail, it is a point of pride. Mechanics speak of the 1,200 to 1,600 revolutions per minute range with reverence, knowing that staying in the band means fewer breakdowns and longer service intervals. There is an art to coaxing 1 million miles out of a block, and it is practiced in the open, under the shop lights, not behind a diagnostic screen. In these shops, the engine's simplicity is its own reward, a daily reminder that real service is measured by what you can hear, touch, and fix without waiting for a software update. October 2002 marked a turning point for every truck manufacturer under the Federal Consent Decree. The old tricks, software patches, and timing tweaks no longer passed muster. Each new engine now faced emission standards that demanded more than mechanical know-how. Mack's response was the ASET platform, Advanced Selective Exhaust Treatment. This meant internal EGR, new sensors, and for the first time, an electronic control module on select models. The E7's familiar mechanics were now surrounded by layers of compliance hardware, each one more complex than the last. Service bulletins from 2003 and 2004 spelled out the new order: regular EGR valve checks, sensor recalibrations, and repairs that required proprietary diagnostic software. The hands-on approach gave way to laptops, cables, and password-protected interfaces. Mechanics who once diagnosed problems by ear now navigated a maze of wiring and error codes. The oil-stained manual was joined by a digital library of troubleshooting guides, each update reflecting another step away from the engine's mechanical roots. By 2007, the EPA's next deadline brought diesel particulate filters to every heavy-duty diesel. The DPF, a ceramic trap in the exhaust, caught soot and burned it off during high-temperature regenerations. Cleaning a DPF meant 3 to 4 hours of labor and up to $1,800 in parts each time. Trucks running short routes rarely hit the temperatures needed for regeneration, leading to clogged filters and unexpected downtime. In 2010, selective catalytic reduction arrived. SCR added a separate tank for diesel exhaust fluid, a dosing pump, and a catalyst module after the DPF. Replacing an SCR catalyst took another 2 hours and $2,000 in parts. DEF pumps and sensors needed annual calibration, each adding an hour of labor and another chance for failure. Warranty data from the early 2010s showed a shift. Claims for after-treatment and sensor failures now rivaled those for core engine repairs, upending the old patterns. On the shop floor, the change was unmistakable. Mechanics who once rebuilt engines in a weekend now spent days chasing electrical faults, waiting on parts, and navigating warranty approvals. Reliability had become a question of software and compliance, not just iron and oil. In Crossville, Tennessee, the Fitzgerald plant once hummed with a pace that defied the official record. Pallets of new frames rolled in from the factory floor, while flatbeds delivered battered, pre-2004 Mack E7 engines for resurrection. The formula was simple: match a brand new chassis and cab with a remanufactured engine that had never tasted a drop of diesel exhaust fluid. The result was a truck that on paper met the definition of new, but under the hood, it ran on a philosophy that federal law was trying to erase. By 2017, Fitzgerald's output had surged past 10,000 glider kits in a single year. The company became the epicenter of a booming trade, supplying fleets and owner-operators desperate for trucks that could be fixed with a wrench, not a diagnostic laptop. In the shadow of tightening emissions rules, each glider kit represented a loophole big enough to drive a convoy through. The EPA's own estimates warned that these trucks were putting as much nitrogen oxides on the road as 200,000 compliant rigs. For a brief window, the market was flooded with the past rebranded as the future. The backlash was swift. In 2016, the EPA imposed a hard cap, no more than 300 glider kits per manufacturer per year. The move was a legal sledgehammer, closing the door that Fitzgerald and its rivals had pried open. The Tennessee Tech Emissions Study, once brandished as proof of environmental parity, was withdrawn under scrutiny. 16 state attorneys general filed lawsuits, arguing that the glider boom was a violation of the Clean Air Act, an industrial sleight of hand that threatened to undo decades of environmental gains. The EPA's Inspector General issued a report confirming the agency's own oversight failures, laying the groundwork for even tighter enforcement. By 2020, the major original equipment manufacturers, Freightliner, Volvo, and International, had exited the glider business entirely. The assembly lines fell silent. For mechanics, the message was clear. The era of mass-producing old iron in new skin was over. The only path left was underground. The glider boom had shown that the value of the E7 was not just in its cast iron, but in its ability to survive a regulatory storm. When the loophole closed, the E7 became contraband, a relic too useful to surrender, too scarce to risk losing. The next chapter would not be written in factory records, but in the quiet calculus of backrooms and barns. A map of legal carve-outs runs quietly beneath the surface of the diesel trade, shaping how and where pre-emissions Macks survive. Mechanics in the know treat the EPA's farm and off-road exemptions as open doors. In states like Indiana and Tennessee, a truck registered for agricultural use can run on a pre-2004 E7 with no questions asked, so long as it stays off the interstate. The paperwork is simple, the inspections are rare, and the engine keeps turning. California, by contrast, draws a hard line. The Air Resources Board bans any heavy-duty diesel without selective catalytic reduction or diesel exhaust fluid after 2007 for on-road use, yet the rule carves out a path for exempt agricultural and off-highway vehicles. What results is a cross-border flow. Engines that can no longer be registered in Fresno find new lives on farms in Nevada or disappear into the Midwest, where emission checks are looser and the mechanic's word is still good enough for a title transfer. Shops have adapted in ways the rulebook never anticipated. Some keep a second ledger for engines labeled off-road use only. Others buy short blocks at auction, then re-stamp serial numbers to match a legitimate farm registration. EPA enforcement memos from the last decade document serial swaps and the quiet migration of engines across state lines, but the practice persists. The logic is unspoken. As long as there is a legal exemption, there is a reason to keep the old iron alive. A shop owner in Kentucky sums up the calculus. If you are smart, you keep one for the farm, one for the quarry, and one for when the state line gets fuzzy. On the auction floor, an E7 short block with a clean bill of sale can double in value if it comes with paperwork that fits an exemption. The system is built on small gaps in regulation, gaps wide enough for a 12,000-pound Mack to slip through if you know which forms to file and which questions not to ask. The calendar on the shop wall reads 2026, but every mechanic with a rebuilt Mack tucked away is already thinking about the next year. The EPA 2027 heavy-duty rule is set to lower the allowable NOx emissions for new trucks to just 0.035 grams per horsepower hour, a limit that on paper is 3 times tighter than the standard set in 2010. Early industry analysis projects a $20,000 to $30,000 premium on every 2027 compliant truck, driven by the need for larger SCR systems, more robust DEF dosing, and catalyst substrates that can survive a decade of high heat cycles. The cost is not just in hardware, it is in the complexity that follows. More sensors, more shutdown codes, more ways for a truck to be sidelined by a part that cannot be fixed on the side of the road. For owner-operators and small fleets, the numbers do not add up. A clean, rebuilt E7 short block, already rare, can be had for less than the price of a single year's depreciation on a new, emissions-heavy tractor. The calculus is simple. If the next wave of regulation makes the new trucks harder to buy and harder to keep running, then the old iron becomes a hedge, not just against breakdowns, but against the future itself. Auction data already shows the effect. Since the 2027 rule was published in the federal docket, the price of a pre-2004 E7 has climbed by thousands of dollars. Mechanics who once traded engines as a side business now keep them close, knowing that every new rule narrows the window for survival. The logic is quiet, but relentless. When the definition of a legal truck changes, the value of what came before is set not by nostalgia, but by what the law cannot erase. Maybe indestructibility is not really an engineering achievement. By 2026, it is a political one. In shops where the old blocks sleep, the E7 endures, not out of nostalgia, but necessity. Modern emissions law reshaped the meaning of reliability, turning yesterday's workhorse into today's forbidden asset. Mechanics have become custodians of an era that regulation erased. Maybe indestructibility isn't really an engineering achievement. By 2026, it's a political one.